Welcome back to The Scoop, everyone. Or should I say, the days of our Montecito live, because the royal soap opera drama continues apace. Now, listen, tensions between the palace and California have spilled back into the headlines again following Prince Harry's recent whirlwind UK visit. Now, the fallout centers on a stark divide between King Charles and Prince William over how to handle the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Now, Charles allowed a brief private reunion at Highgrove, granting him time with Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet, all under the watchful eye of Camilla, as part of a tentative effort to mend family ties. However, this gesture is said to have driven a deeper wedge between him and his actual heir, Prince William. The Prince of Wales reportedly remains firmly opposed to a public or private thaw, deliberately maintaining his distance by taking on separate engagements, including playing polo, to avoid any overlap or visual association with his brother's trip. The rift is further compounded by media fallout and security dynamics surrounding the visit. Following an accommodation shuffle where a last-minute request to stay at Buckingham Palace was turned down, royal insiders report that William is deeply concerned about Harry's media footprint, especially in light of Harry losing his high court phone hacking suit against the Associated Newspapers and the upcoming 30th anniversary of Princess Diana's passing next summer. While the king reportedly hopes his son can eventually present a united front, William views the ongoing public disclosures as a liability for the future of the monarchy, leaving the two heirs at complete odds over how to handle the Sussex situation going forward. Now, to help me sort all this out, I am talking to historian and journalist Hadley Meares, whose work has appeared in Vanity Fair and Hollywood Reporter, and she's going to help us sort all this out. Hadley Meares, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
So listen, I want to get into the family tension of the royals right now because it seems to me it's kind of reached a boiling point. In the last couple weeks, Harry has once again created a lot of drama by saying he not only is a working royal, but then going back to the UK, having kind of a fit over security, even though he knew he was always going to get the same security he had always had, i.e., he would call up and say, "Hey, I'm coming," and they would assess. He was offered Buckingham Palace. He said no. Then he said yes. Then it caused all sorts of drama. He lost the Daily Mail case, the case where he said the Daily Mail had wiretapped him and blagged him, along with 6 others. And then Charles agreed to meet him at Highgrove. And what happened this week? It got even weirder because Meghan did a summer vacation photo dump, and one of her photos was of Loch Ossian in the Highlands of Scotland. What is going on?
I think we're dealing with two people, Harry and Meghan. I don't think they really know what they want. And I think that there's kind of this constant chaos around them. And, I think it's really sad because I really feel for Charles. I think a lot of people forget that Charles spoke with a biographer in the early 90s for the book that came out about him as Prince of Wales, where he said a lot of not so nice things about his parents, right? That they were cold, that they were unloving. And so I think he probably has a lot more sympathy for Harry than we would think he does, because he actually did something very similar. He just, kind of did it behind sources and all of that, and didn't put his name to it like Harry did in Spare in the Oprah interview. So I think we're just looking at a very messy family situation that, is playing out in front of the whole world. And, Harry and Meghan are talking a lot to the media. Charles and his folks are probably also briefing the media. So it's a soap opera, which honestly, isn't that what we always have kind of watched the royal family for, if we're being honest?
Absolutely. I mean, I call it the days of our Montecito lives.
Yeah.
Because every week it seems the protagonists just irk each other. Now, you bring up a really good point that Charles participated in a book, and Diana did as well. So Harry's gotten a lot of heat for Spare, but isn't he doing just what his parents did?
Yeah, he's doing exactly what they did, and I think that the sad thing is that, the Diana book got her a lot of sympathy when she spoke with Andrew Morton, but it also, I think, turned into the kind of rolling tragedy that was the last few years of her life. And Charles, when he spoke for his book, it really damaged his relationship with his mother and father for a long time. So it's sad to me that Harry maybe didn't learn the lesson that exposing these secrets and exposing, how you feel in the moment instead of really thinking about it and maybe talking about it 10 years later when it doesn't seem so sharp, that he didn't realize that that was maybe the best course of action.
Or that he might not have realized that William seems unforgiving and also seems like he does not want to forgive anytime in the near future, especially if Meghan is around. The Waleses at least, blame her for a lot of the strife and a lot of the unhappiness that Harry has had and what he's kind of turned into.
Yeah, I feel really bad for William, actually. I feel like a lot of times people forget that he is also Diana's son. He also went through trauma and tragedy. He probably knew her a lot better. She called him her soulmate. She confided in him a lot. And I think that he still has, I'm sure, anger and resentment and befuddlement with how that all went down. And I think partially because he doesn't talk about it as much, and partially because he married Catherine and kind of got enveloped into this, upper middle class, very normal British family that's the Middletons. People forget that he probably has a whole host of issues deep down that are swirling around. And the one person he could ever count on, I'm sure, was Harry. And now that's gone and that's severed. And I would be incredibly sad and rageful and confused if that happened too. And I understand, sometimes family relationships just don't work out. And unfortunately, in this situation, it's literally like the number one story in every tabloid in the world all the time.
Now, a lot of people are saying that by forgiving Harry and welcoming him into the fold, or trying to
Mm,
through Project Thaw, is really betraying William. And that
yeah.
if Harry and Meghan come back to the UK, at least on a part-time basis, that it will be a mess that is left for William to clean up. What?
That's a really, yeah, that's an interesting theory. And I think that, like I said, I really feel for Charles, and it's his son, and your son is your son is your son. And I'm sure that William probably does feel that way. And I don't know who's right or who's wrong in this situation. It's just there's love and there's anger and there's so much history. But I think the thing that William has that will get him through is that he and Catherine are masters at PR. They do their jobs, they do it well. Catherine does all these amazing things like this, Three Peaks challenge, which she does so, kind of gracefully and perfect timing and perfect photos let out. And I really think that when William comes to power, whatever is going on with Harry and Meghan, who knows? They're a roller coaster, who knows? If he keeps this steady course and kind of makes himself more like the bicycle monarchs, of the Netherlands and stuff, really focuses in on just the family unit, downsizing, opening some of the palaces, selling some properties, that he'll gain so much respect that whatever happens with Harry and Meghan is kind of not going to matter. I mean, you can kind of see that honestly with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, right? I mean, when King Edward VIII abdicated, everybody thought the monarchy's done, this is over. And then you had this new royal couple come in that wasn't as glamorous or sexy or fun, but they were steady. They got people through the war. They seemed kind. They seemed together and like a British family unit. And, then we had Queen Elizabeth, and the monarchy was more respected in lots of ways than ever. So I think if they focus on them, no matter what's going on in kind of the Hollywood craziness in Montecito, they'll be fine.
Well, it's actually interesting that you bring it up because it does seem to be a little bit like history is repeating itself with dealing with the spares.
Mm-hmm.
So now we know that Edward, who was going to be king, abdicated to become the Duke of Windsor.
Mm-hmm.
Edward turned himself into the spare.
Yeah.
And then we have Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and we also have Harry. There always seems to be a historical problem with the spare, and historically, it seems as if only King George really dealt with his brother kind of appropriately in a
Mhm.
way. He said, "You have to leave the country. You cannot come back. You can keep your title, but you're not coming back. And if you come back, you cannot bring your wife and create problems." Now, Elizabeth dealt with it a bit differently with Andrew. She coddled him.
Yeah.
And everything you do is okay. Everything is fine. And he turned into what we now know is kind of the monstrous version of a man we see today.
Yeah.
Harry also seems to have been coddled, and his father also seems to be like, okay, come back. And as much as people may feel bad for him, it's not like Harry's ever apologized. It's not like he's ever said, I'm sorry, not only to his family, but to the British people. Do we think that history is kind of repeating itself? Perhaps not in the monstrous way that Andrew is, but by not dealing definitively with a spare and saying, here are the rules, you cannot break them. Do we think this is going to cause a lot of problems?
I think it's going to cause a lot of drama. I'm not sure if it's going to cause a lot of problems in terms with the monarchy, especially again when William takes over. I really think that a lot of things are going to kind of pale in comparison once William takes over. Once the children become teenagers, become heartthrobs, I think a lot of that will go away. But I think history is repeating itself. And I think, you can look though at one spare who's never complained, and that's Princess Anne.
Mhm.
And so what was done with Princess Anne, is it just her kind of staunch character, her get to it, is it because she's a woman? What made her seem so cool with her role and be the hardest working royal, right? With like hundreds and hundreds of appearances every year. And I think that that might be a good model for William and Catherine to look at in terms of how they're raising Charlotte. And Charlotte seems a lot like Princess Anne, right? She seems very take charge, very secure in herself. So maybe it won't be repeated with the next generation, but it certainly does seem like a pattern.
Well, it also seems that it happens with the male children
Yes.
specifically, and
Mhm.
also that Andrew was the favorite. There have been rumors that, of course, Charles had a softer spot in his heart for Harry.
Right.
So, what happens when a favored child goes off the rails? We've seen it over and over.
Right.
And how do you stop this? And I know that you say, well, it'll change when William comes, but Charles's cancer treatments are going very well. He is expected to live out his full natural life. Yes, he will live it with cancer. However, it's going to be a while. And it seems, and we look just at the percentage of people in the UK who have lost respect for the monarchy, and it's gone from 65% to 55%. How much lower does it need to go? And if Charles keeps coddling Harry and it goes lower, this just seems like a disaster in the waiting.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it could really, really hurt Charles's already lowering approval rates. And, I think that he just, I don't think he cares, maybe. And that does point to maybe him being not as partial to William as he is to Harry, right? That he might kind of leave a mess for William to have to clean up. And I think a big problem that's going to take generations to, not generations, but like a decade at least to get over is not just the whole Harry Meghan kind of chaos factory, but also what happened with Prince Andrew, right? I mean, because not only did Queen Elizabeth coddle him, Charles did eventually strip him of his prince title. He did eventually strip him of things, but it took a while. And I think just kind of the grossness of what was going on with Andrew and Fergie is something that's really kind of soured a lot of royal watchers.
Well, not only did it take a while, but Charles is said to have known about, he is said to have gotten a copy of Virginia Giuffre's book a
Mm.
year before it became public. He is said to have known all about everything Andrew was doing, yet he still, as the great welcomer and, wanted to just heal the rifts, the great healer, wanted to bring Andrew back into the family, invited him to Sandringham, invited him to church in Christmas, brought Sarah Ferguson back. And it turns out to have been a huge mistake. And a lot of people say, well, aren't you kind of doing the same thing with Harry, bringing him and Meghan back? I mean, her summer photos had a photo of Scotland in them, hinting at Balmoral. So there is some talk that Harry and Meghan could be invited to Sandringham this Christmas. Now, we know William and Catherine spend every other year with the Middletons at Christmas, and this is their year, but wouldn't that be a slap in the face? And it just seems like a wrong move from a historian's perspective for Charles.
Yes, I don't think that would be the right move. If they wanted to host them privately, I also wonder, I think a lot of the other people in the royal family are pretty mad at Harry and Meghan too,
Mhm.
and you've seen that in interactions. You see that Mike and Zara Tyndall, who I love, who, I know William wants to make the monarchy smaller, but I hope he doesn't exclude these kind of bright lights like Zara and Mike and like Princess Lady Louise. Like, I think there's some really good up and comers that could add some freshness, to the monarchy. I don't think that would be a good idea. And I think, I think it would probably hurt William and Catherine's feelings. I mean, that's the kind of the thing is, I think sometimes Charles lets his emotions lead
Mhm.
instead of policy. And I think we've seen that kind of over and over. I mean, from Camilla on, right? Kind of his whole life. He's a very emotional guy. He's an intelligent guy, but I'm not sure if he's that discerning of a person.
Ah, interesting. And you see it because as the king, you're supposed to put the country above all, even family. And it is said that that is what Queen Elizabeth did, with one exception, Andrew. And people can say, well, but the stain on Elizabeth's relation or reputation is Andrew. People warned her, don't make him a trade representative. They told her repeatedly throughout his reign as trade representative, he's misbehaving. There are issues here. And she just ignored it. It'll go away, sweep it under the rug. And he was only taken down out of that position when Epstein came to light and his friendship with Epstein. So it does seem that Charles is mimicking his mother in a way. However, as you point out, there are several times he has put his own personal feelings above the good of the country.
Yes.
How does that work as a king?
It's interesting. I think a lot of people would argue that it makes him, a weak king, and that's too bad. I think that you're looking at people who have had very damaged lives for all of their privilege and all of their, pomp and all the entitlement they have has really kind of warped things in a lot of ways. And I think that he does the least he needs to do until he has to do it. And I think you've seen that over and over again. And I don't know what the end game is with any of it. I think it's interesting with the Harry and Meghan situation is that they've shown themselves to be quite fickle, right? They change
Mhm.
their mind a lot. They change what they want a lot. And I think that makes Charles, whatever he's doing to welcome them back in, it puts him in a very precarious situation that he seems to be unaware of, which I think is, rather, I don't know, sad. Because again, at the core, I just think it's a dad who wants his son and doesn't want his son to go the way of the Duke of Windsor, where the Duke of Windsor just kind of became a joke who was traveling around cafe society and getting drunk in nightclubs. I think he sees a little bit of that model of what can happen, right? To
Isn't
somebody.
it already happening a little bit? I
Oh,
mean,
it's, yeah,
Harry
absolutely.
seems Harry
They're
is treated
they're
like a
still trying to do more charitable things. I mean, the Duke of Windsor and Duchess of Windsor never pretended that they cared about anyone, right? They were
right.
just like, we're partiers.
That's true. However, Harry himself has turned into a bit of a joke. He's lost scent to Bali.
Yes.
Invictus is mired in financial issues, and a lot of people are saying, "Hey, why does it cost 60 million pounds to put on this show for 500 athletes when other people in other countries like the Department of Defense's Warrior Games does it for 2 million every year?" So, it does seem that their charity looks to be more like a money grab or some sort of a sheen on their reputation so that Meghan can go out and make the money. Now, that is not great. And it does seem, while the Duke of Windsor, at the very least, said, "Hey, I'm not charitable, let's party."
Yeah.
Harry seems to be obfuscating about what is really going on. But he also seems to say, "Hey, this is what I want. I want to do charity," but he doesn't actually understand what doing charitable acts actually is. It's not standing out and glad handing and taking photos and showing up for an hour or two.
Absolutely. And I think that's very true. And, Archwell kind of ended in a similar kind of strange, suspicious fashion. And I think that he and Megan do seem not very willing to learn. And I think that he hasn't been able to really figure out that, okay, I used to be able to show up and just shake hands and smile and everybody would be happy. But now, if I really want to do these charitable things and be a part of, I've got to learn the nitty gritty. I basically have to be an intern where I go and learn, how do you raise money from people? How do you set up a structure that works? And that seems to be, you see that kind of with a lot of people saying that Meghan clearly couldn't hold a knife in her cooking show. It's just stuff where they're missing the gritty details of what makes something successful or good, and kind of the name is what gets them places, and it seems to be, starting to get them increasingly less places. And so that is concerning.
Mm.
And I wish that they would just, I think a great course of action for them right now would be go home, hang out with your kids, chill kind of over the last, 8 years of insanity, and just really focus in on making a plan and what we want to do, and just not play this kind of addictive game of he said, she said all the time.
It's interesting because it seems that you said addictive because it does
Mhm,
seem that they are addicted. But
mhm.
what Harry also seems to be addicted to is the entitlement that he's always had his entire life. I want this, do it now, or I'll throw a fit. I want this, this happens. This is my wife, she gets what she wants. This
Yeah.
kind of personality trait that he's clearly had. It's only really come to light over the last 8 years publicly. But I want to get into Project Thaw and the doves and the hawks. So In the palace, that is. So Clive Alderton, who was the biggest hawk in the palace, who's been Charles's private secretary for many years. He's worked at the palace for 20 years before that. He was the ambassador to Morocco. And he set a firm line. He said basically, this is what Queen Elizabeth would do. You said you're out, you're out. You don't get to go half in, half out. Now there are other people in the palace, including Tobin Andre or Theo Rycroft, who are saying, no, let's do what Charles wants. Charles just wants his son back. And so it seemed that there was this internal war, and it seems that the Doves have won because Clive Alderton just announced his resignation, which will take effect next year. What does that say to you?
That says to me that, there's probably been a lot of disagreements within the palace, and Clive, didn't Harry call him the Wasp? Um,
Mhm.
Clive is probably done. He says he's leaving for personal reasons. I'm sure that it's an absolutely hotbed of an environment in there, especially with kind of this series of chaotic actors within the family who keep doing these things. And I think that, it is a new day and Charles is king. And at the end of the day, if he wants to let Harry back in, he's going to let Harry back in. And apparently, other considerations aren't going to sway him that much. And you can argue and debate, and I would agree the intelligence of that and what it's going to do to William. But I think that it's the the palace is its own ecosystem, right? It's these people who are obsessed with this image that it's happening all the time. And I sometimes think, man, if it was just like those Scandinavian countries where it's just smaller and everything's more contained and not as big a deal, wouldn't it be easier? But then I'm also like, but then it wouldn't get as much coverage. The UK wouldn't get as much tourism. They wouldn't be the most famous family in the world anymore. So I think it probably does signal that Charles's side is winning.
Well, it's interesting because William has told friends that he does want to follow a more European model of
Mhm.
monarchy, and looks to people like Queen Margaret of Denmark, who woke up one day, looked at her younger son, and said, we're taking all the titles, sorry. And they were upset, and they didn't talk for a couple of months. Now they're back together. And she has since come out and said, maybe I shouldn't have just dropped the bomb like that, but
Right.
it still was going to happen. And do you think that's what will happen when William becomes king? That it will be, okay, if you're not working, you do not have a title. And if you are working, here are the rules.
I think that's a distinct possibility. Yes. I'm not sure if he'd go so far as to take the prince away. There's a difference between taking the title they were given, like the Sussex title, than taking the actual prince title. It's more complicated because he was born that. But I think so. And I think that William's just going to draw a very hard line between who's the royal family and who's just family members. And I think that's pretty clear. And I am surprised that Charles hasn't done that more because, in a lot of ways, he has slimmed down. If you look at the balcony now, when they make balcony appearances, it's actually rather depressing. It's like the Wales and like the four older working royals.
Right,
So
right.
I think that that's a distinct possibility. I don't know if he wants the backlash of what would happen if that is done, though.
But I feel like there is already backlash of people saying,
Oh,
why are Meghan and Harry the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? They've been to Sussex once. They live in Montecito, and they have made multiple complaints about the royal prison, royal life, what the royals did to them. They've laid complaints about racism and other things. So why not just say, why wouldn't Charles just say, hey, why don't you just be my son
mm.
and we'll move on?
I don't know. I mean, I truly don't. I think it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, I just think it's all very tricky, and I hope I hope out of all of this that maybe Harry will finally feel some peace and stop trying to fight all the time. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And whatever is done that's not what he wants, he's going to leak. There's going to be a fight. And that's kind of the way it is.
That does seem like it's absolutely happening.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, final question. Do you feel like Charles is a stopgap king between Elizabeth and William?
100%. Yes. And I think that,
Why do you think that? And tell me more.
oh, I think that because I think that Charles came into the monarchy, Charles came into his position as monarch with so much baggage. That's just the truth. I mean, the whole Diana debacle, everything with Camilla, it's been just an insane ride for decades. And people are very polarized about him, very polarized about Camilla being queen, even though I personally like Camilla. And it's just been he's a tainted figure, right? And he came to the kingship when he was very old. And William is young-ish. He's my age, so I think of him as young, but he's young. He's cute. He's got this beautiful wife, these beautiful kids. He seems to have a good head on his shoulders. He's Diana's son. Like, I don't think that can be emphasized enough. He's Diana's son. And so I think a lot of people, just like you pointed out that I am, kind of just skip over Charles, whatever Charles is going to do, and look to what William's going to do.
Hadley Meares, thank you so much. I appreciate your insight, and please come back.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much, you guys. I appreciate you joining in. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the hype and the bell so you never miss a scoop and you always know what's going on. Take care and have a great weekend.